Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the beginning of a two-day celebration of International Museum Day 2014 to tonight's lectures on the special theme of International Museum Day this year, which is Museum Collections Make Connections. And we are very happy to partner with INTACH, the West Bengal Chapter of INTACH, in organizing tonight's program. And we have a real galaxy of stars to speak on different aspects of this theme. We will begin with presentations by people who will speak on this theme from the perspectives of some of the best museums in France, Britain and Germany. So we will begin with Mr. Anindya Basu, architect, who will speak on this theme with reference to museums in Germany. Then we will have Mr. Stephane Amalir, who is the director of the Française in Kolkata, will speak on the museums in France. And then Mr. Samarjit Guha, head programs of British Council in Eastern India, will speak on the British angle. And then of course we will have somebody to speak on this theme, Sri Jawhar, CEO Prasar Bharati, who, as the former Secretary of Culture, initiated museum reforms in India. And we will speak tonight on how do we waste museum opportunities and collections. And I had the privilege of looking at Jawhar's presentation. I guess he is not going to say very nice things about museums in India, including the Victoria Memorial. But we look forward to receiving some stage advice from him also in this regard. So without further ado, I would like to hand over the proceedings to our partner, the President of INTACH, West Bengal Chapter, Mr. G.M. Kapoor. This year is the 30th anniversary of INTACH, which is another, which is a partner in excellence with museums like us. So over to Museum Kapoor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Gupta. And good evening, friends. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to this International Museums Day celebration. I sometimes wonder that it's because that all these days are fixed by people in Europe. For them it's the advent of spring, and for us it's the advent of the sweltering heat. But anyway, we have to suffer it and we will have to celebrate under these circumstances. It is also the 30th year of INTACH. INTACH was founded in 1984 by late Rajiv Gandhi, and over the years we have created many milestones. This is the 30th year which we are celebrating. It will be great pleasure to celebrate it along with an august institution like Victoria Memorial. And we have the presence of a luminary like Mr. Jawhar Sircar, who is incidentally a long-standing life member of INTACH, Kolkata Chapter. And we've always received great support from him, and I'm sure we continue to receive that in future as well. Without further ado, may I now invite Mr. Anindya Basu, who is also an INTACH member, who has just returned from a trip to Germany, a visit to museums, and he will share his experience with us.
Good evening, distinguished guests, this august audience. I am here only because I've been very kindly requested by the Directorate of the Guha Institute, Kolkata, as well as Mr. G.M. Kapoor, to give a presentation on museums in Germany that I've just been privileged to visit. Mainly because Mr. Friedman Maker, who is the director, is presently out of Calcutta. So the Goethe Institute has requested me to put up a very hurriedly made presentation. I have returned not even 24 hours ago. So I'm still reeling from a sense of jet lag and a changed biological clock. But from whatever I could gather, here is a very short 12-slide tips on what the museum scenario in Berlin, Dresden, where I visited, wanted to talk about. And then I'll just give a very quick run through some of the visuals that may enable to generally delineate and illustrate what I'm trying to talk about. In 1830, the oldest museum in Berlin happened. Berlin, incidentally, is perhaps the only city in the world which has been divided politically into two polarized political thoughts, so to say, and was reunited in 1989 November, after which a whole lot of planning has gone into the city. A major of a very grand scale has gone into Berlin and is still undergoing. And I'm going to talk a little about the vision that I have heard from Professor Dr. Eisenhower, who heads the State Museum of Berlin group of museums. He incidentally is in charge of something like 5,000 museums across Germany. So the old museum, Altes Museum, was the first museum of something called a museum island, which is formed by two branch outs of the Spree River. So there's a triangular patch formed, and that vantage point on the Spree River, I'll just come to that visual very shortly, forms a cluster of many museums which forms the museum island. Just before that, a little word about what I have gathered from the discussions we have had with the different museum directors. It seems that they have realized that today's lifestyle has meant that social spaces in general are shrinking. And so new mutant spaces have to fill up for forming public social spaces. A major responsibility of these mutant so-called spaces would be the museums. Since the International Council of Museums in 1970, there was a summit, ICOM, after which it was decided that generally museums, apart from being a temple of learning, should also become a kind of an epicenter of happening social spaces to attract people from all walks of life, especially young minds. In the Berlin city itself, as you will see, there are a whole lot of museums, and the central, the central part of Berlin has something like 84 museums. 190 museums in the city itself, which is amazing. And the operators are many kinds, public and privately funded foundations, limited companies, some run the municipal administration, the government of the state of Berlin, the federal government, some university museums, church museums, as well as privately owned. And there are special, since 1997, these special programs have been thought of, like a very special program called the Long Night of Museums, when all the museums in Berlin would be open from evening till well past midnight. Around 100 museums, and 2 years, one in spring and in autumn, preferably on a Saturday, so that the next Sunday would be carried forward into the activity. And there will see something like 2 lakh visitors per night. Some of the museums we will discuss is one of the largest cultural foundations, the Prussian Cultural Heritage Foundation, which is looked after by Professor Dr. Eisenhower himself. It was founded in 1957. Then there is the National Museums in Berlin, something called a Kulturforum, which is a second museum precinct magnet after the museum island that was exclusively found in the western part of Berlin, what used to be earlier the the Federal Republic of Germany, where we have a whole set of new architects, new age architecture meant to attract a second epicenter of the museum culture. The first is the Museum Island. Here is the Museum Island. This is the river Spree, which flows from roughly southwest to north, southeast to northwest. And actually I've put the image in a rotated mode so that this is more clearly visible. And here is the entire set of Museum Islands. Very alarmingly, the Deutsche Bahn main railway runs across through the Museum Islands. And it's a huge engineering challenge that they have undertaken, whereby all the museums, there is the Pergamon Museum, the Bode Museum, the Altus Museum, the Neuss Museum, the proposed new James Simon Museum, all these would be connected in one single underground repository of labs and conservation activities. The entire technical backup would be provided by one single underground connected activity. And now that's a huge challenge because it has to all to combat the engineering significance of a train-old, this also is a 100-year-old train line running across the Museum Island, not to speak of the two Elbe river edges. This expansion will also be merged into the surrounding institutions such as the Humboldt University, the Center for Archaeology and the Humboldt Forum, which is now being undertaken here presently. So we have talked about the Bode Museum, which is the name of one of the founders of modern museological thought, Wilhelm von Bode, and this museum is in his name. This is the Museum of Byzantine Art. Then the Neuss Museum, which is dedicated to ancient Egyptian Nubian cultures, was totally damaged, completely damaged by Second World War bombing, and they have reconstructed and maybe slightly controversially, they have rebuilt the original form in total. They have not changed, so they have really made a false historical building, so to say. But the entire underground, the basement, has been totally refurbished and made specifically for all sorts of modern engineering background. We went into detail, but I'm not going to bore you with all the details. But we had to go and see the entire detail, including the refrigeration, the heating system of all the museums combined. Then the Deutsche Historische Museum, which is the German history museum, not under the State Museum of Berlin, but it's an independent entity. It's also a remarkable building. It documents the entire German history, and it is one of the prized annex buildings designed by the world famous architect INTACH, who was famous for his design for the extension of the Louvre Museum. In fact, Professor Eisenhower almost confessed that the broad vision was to rival the Louvre. So the State Museum of Berlin will rival the Louvre and become not only a precinct of museums, but a focal point of European culture. Then there are the newly done but remarkably attractive and informative foundation, the German Museum of Technology, which is only about 30 years old. The new building has shifted to this wonderfully done extension of a sugar mill. So it's a 4-story building, sympathetic to the texture of the sugar mill, with one part annex which looks over to the something called the central green patch of Berlin called the Tiergarten. So the vision generally was museum precinct as an emerging social space, and there was also something of the recognition of the universal value of collections, what we can call global heritage. So somebody's heritage is not confined to a country or a race or a region or a global heritage. So in effect, the early Brazilian museums was talking about preserving European culture and maybe at some point global culture. And then of course the value of education and entertainment at the same time, so that there is a pull for all sorts of people and involvement of communities. This may be not so much true for Berlin city per se, because it's a huge, it's a cosmopolitan city, but for all the other smaller museums that are privileged to